Hi, this
Hi.
is Gabriel Andrade. I'm broadcasting from the Cayman Islands. And joining me on the other end of the line is Dr. Mary Lefkowitz. She is the author of many books, one of them which is Not Out of Africa, where she has a long scholarship on the ancient world. And today we'll be speaking about Afrocentrism. And I came across, welcome, Doctor.
Thanks so much.
I came across your book a few years ago, maybe 15 years ago in Vancouver, Canada, and in a used bookstore. And I saw this statue of, it was either Aristotle or Socrates with a hat on, with an X, right? And I was always a fan of the Malcolm X movie.
Yeah.
So, it really got my attention. And then later on, I discovered that that wasn't your idea and that you actually thought that that was not a good idea to market the book that way. But let me tell you that at least in my case, it achieved its purpose because it immediately got my attention. Anyways, what is Afrocentrism?
Well, it's a lot of things. The part that I was concerned about was the claim that was made by certain authors that Greek philosophy was stolen from Egypt. And I thought, well, first of all, you can't steal ideas. But secondly, you can't really, well, it wasn't. That's all. There's just no evidence. And but then I had to find out why people made that claim because it didn't come from nowhere. So that got me on a really interesting search.
Right. But it is true that the Greeks did look to the Egyptians every once in a while, right? I mean, Plato talks about myths and all that coming from the Egyptians and so on, right?
Absolutely. No, they learned a lot from Egypt, and they were actually had colonies in Egypt. They were trading colonies. They were kept pretty separate, but they were kind of there. So they were in a position to learn something about Egypt. And Herodotus, the great historian, went to Egypt, and they respected Egypt greatly. But that doesn't mean that philosophy came from there. It means that you can see Egyptian influence really clearly in art, in Greek art. That's where you get it in architecture.
Not in philosophy.
No, I think that's, I'd be willing to be corrected if any text turned up that showed some signs of that, early texts of Egyptian writers. But it seems to be a Greek thing. And I'm not sure why. I don't think language has anything to do with it. I think all languages are capable of saying a lot of things. So it's not, it's hard to account for it in any way, except that there were these people who were thinking very hard about why things were the way they were and got away from a religious interpretation of it into something else. And it's taken off from there.
Right. And how does this relate to race? Because so far you've only said that, okay, I mean, it's the claim that some ideas that we've always thought that they were Western, they come from Africa. But at any case, even if they came from Africa, it would be from Northern Africa. And Northern African peoples, they're not really all that dark. So how does it come that dark-skinned people embraced this idea of Afrocentrism? How does the idea of race come into being here?
Well, it's partly that it was an old idea that Egyptian philosophy came, there was an Egyptian university and that philosophy spread from there to Greece. But that was really it was a fictional novel written in France in the 18th century, and it got into Freemasonry. Freemasonry was a pretty popular way of getting an alternative to religion, an alternative particularly to Catholicism in France. And a lot of people in America, I'd say George Washington and others, were very interested in it as a means of understanding life. And that was all based on this novel, which had universities in Egypt teaching Greek philosophy before the Greeks. It was a fiction, and it was accepted as that. And I think that's how the idea became rather popular. But how does it all relate to race? In a way, it really doesn't, except that I don't think the Egyptians were white. I think they were lighter skinned than some people in Africa, just for practical reasons. But skin color depends a lot on where you are. I mean, over the centuries, the reason that that Europeans have bleached out so much is that it's a way of getting more sunlight and more vitamin D into their skin than would come any other way. It's not any other kind of superiority at all. It's just practical. Light colored eyes to see better. But in darker situations, whereas dark colored eyes protect you against the sun. So Mediterranean people tend to have darker colored eyes than Norwegians, say. And then, of course, colonialism gets everything totally mixed up and messed up. But that's another topic. So I guess that's how the idea got started. And, everyone wants to claim the Egyptians, some connection with the Egyptians, because their civilization is so interesting and their architecture is so monumental. And I think that's kind of how the idea got into a whole question of race and so on. I wish the whole concept of race didn't exist, because it's gotten all mixed up with politics, and it really is not that important. It shouldn't be that important. I know it is, and I know in the United States it's become,
but Afrocentrists do make it important, because they make a big deal out of this, right? So their whole claim is that not only the Egyptians are the originators of philosophy, but they were also black. So they're bringing race into this.
Yes. Yeah.
Right.
Unfortunately, and that just made the whole thing worse, because if you said, no, look, this isn't quite what happened, here's what happened and why, then they say, no, you're a racist. And you're doing this because you want to have white supremacy. Well, no, I certainly don't. And I don't think anybody who thinks these arguments don't make any sense, or make very little sense, thinks that. They just want to get the history straight. At the same time as this Afrocentrism was going on, there was a professor at Cornell named Martin Bernal who wrote a book called Black Athena. And his claim was that Greek civilization had been massively influenced in all levels, not just in art, which is clear, but in everything else. And he was attempting to prove this mainly by etymology. He had a theory that a large chunk of Greek language came from Egypt, and he had rather interesting ways of trying to argue this. I don't think very many of them hold up at all. It just doesn't work that way. I think a lot of Greek words, the origin of Greek words, ancient Greek words, isn't known. A lot of them is maybe more than 50% are known very clearly where they come from. And there are some loan words from Egyptian, because, as I said, the Egyptians were in Greece for centuries before philosophy was invented. But I think Greek is basically an Indo-European language, and there are other words that got in there from who knows where, because so many languages were lost. They just didn't have writing, and so it didn't get recorded in any way. At least the Egyptians did have a writing system, and a lot of Egyptian inscriptions and papyri can be read now, but it still isn't a language that's closely related. And that's, people didn't know that. People's ignorance about all this is pretty great. A lot of this stuff isn't taught in schools, and I think the myth of the Greek dependence on Egypt was very popular with many people of African descent in this country, because it made them feel better. It was.
Welcome back to Breakdown Friday. Joseph Ward, Professor Carl Tone Jones, Super Pat back for specific reasons. Super Pat back, what up? And as you can see from the video, we are diving into the topic about the Egyptian influence on Greek civilization. The lady in the video, Mary Lefkowitz, She's popular because of the debate that she was a part of, or the massacre she was a part of. I think probably in the early 90s when her and another professor debated, Dr. John Henry Clark and Martin Bordeaux, the gentleman who authored Black Athena. So Mary Lefkowitz and the other white guy debated Dr. Clark and Martin Bordeaux. Dr. Clark really didn't need no help, but she got the floor wiped with her then. And if you listen to her talk in that debate and in this video, it's a lot of incomplete thoughts that she has. She doesn't even answer the first question. What is Afrocentrism? Because we need to understand what Afrocentrism is first before we can go further to understand why this whole field and theory and the concept of Afrocentrism exists, and why out of this Afrocentrism you had scholars who were adamant about proving that Egypt was founded by African people. And that's one of the questions that we are going to get to, is why is it important to prove that Egypt was an African civilization? No, it was founded by African people, and the concepts and the philosophies came from African people. But we got to start from the top. So Pat, I want to start with you, my brother. Before I ask you what Afrocentrism is, because we got to get into that, what are your thoughts about Mary Lefkowitz's claims of the Egyptian philosophy not influencing the Greek philosophy and the founding of Greece?
I think she's playing word games. Like, she's playing Scrabble.
Yeah.
When you listen to it, she's arguing semantics. She can admit that the ancient Greeks, had contact with ancient Egyptians. They had contact with several people in that area. She can admit that it influenced their culture, their art.
Right.
If it influenced their art, it influenced their culture. Her beef comes with the use of the term stolen, per the clip that was just, she doesn't like. So to me, that means this whole thing isn't a historical issue. This is a you issue. Like, and about the context that you're putting on the terms, because you feel like an idea can't be stolen. Well, Mary, let's say you have a great idea for a book. You tell me and I write that book. Did I not just steal your idea? Like, but even to that, she doesn't really ever address the core issue of how the narrative was used to keep Black people in place. I won't touch on that too much because I know PC is going to get into that heavy unless my brain is being loopy. But she presented a couple things here. I'll go over them real quick while they're still fresh in my mind before I forget, because I need to do what PC does and take notes, because he's a smart man and I like to follow behind smart people. See, Joe's taking notes too. I be out here free balling. So, every once in a while it hit my thigh kind of weird, and I'd be like, oh, that hurt a little bit. So, one, the colorblind narrative that she presents, race shouldn't matter. Like, that's a whole talking point in and of itself, because she's coming at it from a position of power in their structure. This notion of a colorblind society. I know we're gonna get into it. Again, I'm gonna go through these next ones real quick. The Frenchman she mentioned, she claims that the belief in the Egyptian mystery systems that was spread all over the world, the Egyptian mysteries were the educational systems that set up in Greece, that a lot of the Afrocentric scholars, like the man that wrote the Black Athena, they attribute these mystery systems as being the place where a lot of ancient Greek philosophers went and studied and honed their craft and their thinking and their ideas, and then they brought it back to Greek. So she says the Frenchman created that school of thought as fiction, a work of fiction, but the Freemasons liked it because of the power that it gave them in terms of historical attribution, and so they saved it as historical. That's her argument with the Frenchman and how all that ties in. And then there's also the point of she isn't presenting anything. Like, this is why her thoughts were disjointed. She's so focused on proving what didn't happen that she doesn't really reveal anything about what did happen. And she spent so much of her life focused on the errors and inconsistencies as she sees them, because she always leaves herself an out. I've never read it. Well, there's a whole bunch of things you've never read. They got fucking buildings filled with, again, we call them libraries. Pretty sure you haven't read everything. But then there's also the argument that just because you haven't seen it doesn't mean it doesn't exist, which is why typically if you're going to push back on a school of thought, you have to present a counter school of thought or have strong, irrefutable evidence and be able to say, look, I don't know where this came from, but I know this isn't it because of these facts. She never presents those things. Everything is based off, well, I haven't seen this, or I haven't done that, or I haven't read this, or I haven't. That's cool. But it wasn't just black scholars pushing Afrocentrism. There were white scholars pushing it too. Mm-hmm. There are a number of different people from different races. Race shouldn't matter, right? There are a number of people from different races all pushing this school of thought. Now, I'm not saying that makes them right, but I am saying it means you can't narrow Afrocentrism down to disgruntled black people.
And if, my pushback on race shouldn't matter is, if it shouldn't matter, then why are you going so hard to prove that the Greeks did it? And why are you going so hard to try to say that the Egyptians were not dark-skinned African people? Why do they have to be, why do they have to resemble the modern day North Africans, or even North Africans at the time who were a bit light-skinned? Because, and I'm getting to that, but she talking about the phenotypes. I just reminded myself, don't go too far yet. All right. So, but yeah, she on that bullshit, basically. Point blank, period. PC, what are your overall thoughts on the video, man?
That's it. No. So, and Pat did a wonderful job. It's sort of like outlining the way we need to go about this. So what I got from the video was similar to what Pat said. Basically, she's not making a historical case. And I hope her book is a lot clearer, a lot more clear, provides more clarity to her argument than her inability to explain it. Because
I doubt it.
Right. Correct me if I'm wrong. Was that the debate where Dr. Clark said that I debate my equal, all others I teach?
And she was mumbling through that debate. Right.
So we already seem to this comes out as sort of like one of those bitter, somebody that's struck with bitterness. She's sort of trying to get her lick back for losing that debate so in such a public fashion. And so now she's on this conquest because Dr. Clark is one of the, chief historians in terms of breaking down African culture and breaking down its influence on the world. He was the first Hidden Colors orator, if you want to call it that, where it showed Africans' influence all over the world. Well, I won't say the first, but he was one of the first. So when I think about this whole concept of inventions and things that nature, inventing culture, I think not only in Africa, because like I said before, things that happen to black people all over the world are a microcosm to what happens in Africa. I think about the great inventor Lewis Latimer, who, although he was only credited with creating the filament in the light bulb to actually make it work and last longer than 3 seconds before it popped, he was sort of the chief engineer in Thomas Edison's workshop And there has been many, you know, uh, theories. I won't say theories, but there's been many historians who've gone back and said he was really the inventor of about 70%, 70 to 80% of Thomas Edison's inventions, but his name didn't go on the inventions in the patent house. All right. I think about her acknowledging the African presence in Greece. All right. I think about that. Greece and which was followed up by Roman culture, Greek mythology, the Romans that came back to back. That's why it's known as the Roman Greco era or the Greco-Roman era. I think about the fact that Greek mythology doesn't compare to African mythology because African mythology is older. I think about the fact she acknowledged that Africans were in Greece, Egyptians were in Greece. But did she give them their right name at the time? At the time, I don't think they were Egyptians. I believe they were of Carthage. I believe this was at the time Hannibal had crossed the Alps with the elephants, you know, spreading his seed and actually claiming that land until they salted the lands from which he was getting his crop. So, and also think back to how when white folk, European white folk, when they come out for you, when they come for you, if they win, they burn your books. And they're legendary for having book burning campaigns, even when they're battling with each other.
Alexander did it.
Right. So if you want to talk about people who steal, well, I'm about to cuss, people who steal stuff and don't provide the credit for it, you're talking about white folk. There's not one thing white people have invented or taken credit for that you can go back and reach back to find a predecessor was not white. And further identify this and say this wasn't, that she doesn't want it to be about race. I find it very, very rich that racists don't mind being racist until their racism works against them. Then all of a sudden, I don't see color. I don't see black people, you know, and I think it's very convenient for her to hide behind that. You know, the movie National Treasure was based on, you know, stealing the treasure of King Solomon's temple, right? And I know because that movie was shot here in Philadelphia. One of the things that other researchers have thought about, have stated, was that the treasure wasn't gold and emeralds and all those other fancy gems that were depicted in the movie. The treasure were the allotment, was his library. You think about Freemasons, and I'm trying to draw this line here. The Knights Templar learned about King Solomon's temple through their raids in Africa. They grew in power based on the knowledge they gained from that. This is more proof. If you actually understand Freemasonry, the whole concept of Freemasonry is designed, every level you step up in Freemasonry is a step up in the temple of King Solomon. The tools, the gavel, and the compass square are things that was used to measure, build, and cut in the temple. Don't ask me about how I know all these things. But it's not a serious secret. You can watch this on the History Channel. But the bottom line is, it speaks to the fact that they all got these things from African sources. they got all this information. They got all the technology. They got all the different what they considered magic at the time, but was really sciences from African scholars. Timbuktu, older than any other library found throughout the world, unless I'm mistaken. And it was a place where people came and traveled all from about. The European scholars that she's talking about, the philosophers, Socrates, Plato, they all discussed in their own way and learning at the feet of African teachers and scholars. So for her to make this argument, it speaks basically to a person who was bitter. So now she's just going to split hairs because she lost that debate and she's been trying to win the rematch that nobody signed up to fight ever since.
She'll be all right. She'll be all right. Got your ass whooped, Mayor. But so the first question that the gentleman asked her was, what is Afrocentrism? And clearly she don't know what it is because she Bear Sanders that question and just went to well, you know, they want to make Greece black. So let me provide you with what Afrocentrism is. A cultural and political movement whose mainly African American adherents regard themselves and all other blacks as synergetic Africans and believe that their world view should positively reflect traditional African values. It's about having an African world view, seeing the world and experiencing the world and being able to tell the African stories. Everything is through our own unique lens, our creative lens, our lens that's original. That's what I want to say. Our original lens. That's how we're seeing the world. So if I'm seeing the world through an African world view, and you're trying to tell me that Egypt is, or the philosophy that the Egyptians had come from a European worldview, well then yes, we're going to have clashes. But you have to understand what Afrocentrism is first to be able to understand that worldview, because she herself is Eurocentric in her worldview. That's why she's experiencing the world and expressing herself through a European lens. That's why she wants to push back on the arguments about the African influence on Greek culture and Greek philosophy. Like she said, you can't steal ideas. Bullshit. Like both of you hit on bullshit. We all know people can steal ideas all day, every day. I don't have to hit on that. She got into talking about Herodotus. Now, I wrote down Herodotus's name because she mentioned him in this clip, but if you go back and watch the debate between her and Dr. Clark and Dr. Bruno and the other gentleman, one of her things on Herodotus was he didn't speak the language. He didn't speak the Egyptian language, and he wasn't necessarily thoroughly educated on the Egyptian culture. So he could not have he didn't have a great enough understanding to really express the African influence on the Greeks, or even just the African worldview or what he observed. So Dr. Clark was like, hold up. So you telling me the brother can't tell you what he saw? Because he's telling you, Herodotus is telling you what he saw. And you telling me that the brother can't tell you what he saw. Now, they also admitted, yeah, Herodotus, if you go back and read the books, that the Iliad and the Odyssey, there's some things that, you know, can be mythological, but it's also talking about his own account of what he's saying. But also it's her really trying to take away the evidence that has been used throughout the years, right? Being able to take that away. Like, Europeans have done this for a while. When it comes to oral history and oral traditions, they look down and they disregard oral traditions and oral history. And that's one of the things she did in the debate with Dr. Clark that I was watching earlier. She was basically dismissing any oral history that was passed down. And, you know, that's from a Eurocentric lens and a Eurocentric worldview, because from an Afrocentric worldview, we regard oral traditions because that's how we've always passed down traditions. We've written and we've had oral traditions. So all those things come into play. So, you know, that idea that, or the claim that you can't steal ideas, or that the evidence that was presented, that have been presented for so long, she just dismissing the evidence because it's not, like you said, it's not what she wants to agree with. So here we are. I mean, think about it. Egypt was between its 18th and 21st dynasty by the time Greece came about. So just think about that. But on that third intermediate period between the 18th and 21st dynasty, by the time Greece came about. So where the hell did all these philosophies come from? Like Pat been saying, the Greeks couldn't have came up with them, because Egypt between that 18th and 21st dynasty. You mean to tell me between all these dynasties they had nothing? Well, we can go back and find all this evidence of this philosophy and stuff, and it just so happened to be so similar to what the Greeks had. Come on now.
Well, I think one of the things too is what you just said about Herodotus. You know, like, she's a modern day Herodotus. If you want to say this man didn't understand the culture well enough to articulate what he experienced, well, do you understand Afrocentrism?
She's even made the claim in that lecture that Herodotus didn't even understand have a good grasp of Greek culture. They really understand. I'm like, how are you going to say somebody didn't understand what they experienced, and then you, because you read it, you have a better understanding than somebody who experienced it?
Well, but this is, like I said, and PC made a great point. One of the points I was hinting at, and I'm glad, you know, he fucking slammed that home, is, you know, how famous they are for book burning. So it becomes a real convenient excuse to say, and like I said, she always gives herself an out. But look, chick, you're doing the same thing. You're trying to, you don't speak, as far as I know, you don't speak ancient Egyptian or ancient Greece. You don't speak any of the ancient languages. As far as I don't know if you can read them or not. Are you fluent? Can you write it? You didn't experience it.
Yeah, I think she may have alluded to some kind of fluency or some kind of understanding of the Greek language or whatever in the debate. I'm not sure, but she damn sure don't understand the Egyptian. But she don't have the grasp of it. But I know what you're saying.
Yeah, here's my point to anybody that would also say that. All right, which dialect? It's not like all the Greeks all over ancient Greece spoke the language the same way with the same contextual and cultural meanings. Which dialect do you understand, and how do you know that that's the dialect that is a requisite for understanding what and how the ancient Egyptians influenced it? Like, you don't, not only do you not understand ancient Greek culture in the way that Herodotus did because he experienced it, but you also don't understand modern Black American culture, modern Afrocentrism. You're living in the age and you're so busy fighting against it that you haven't even bothered to study it. And we know you haven't bothered to study it because for the last 40 years, you've been arguing the same point. Hey. Your argument has not evolved. So you haven't even developed your own centralized theory about what, like the dude asked you, where did this come from? You mean after 40 years, you can't answer that question?
No, because she couldn't answer the first question.
She should have just said, I'd rather not say.
Right.
I mean, like think about like her disingenuous attempt to describe the different phenotypes and how they are affected by the sun. So in a colder, darker climate, yes, people will have lighter skin and lighter eyes. Okay, so the opposite of that, and where is Egypt located again? And in the desert.
Man, Egypt is on the freaking equator. You don't get no darker than that.
I'm just saying. And let's not confuse the ancient Egyptians, the ones who built the civilizations, with the people who occupy Egypt now. Let's not confuse that. Because there's overwhelming evidence to show that, even the matter of fact, the philosophies of Egypt that were in Egypt are so African that they came up from the heart of Africa, from the beginning of the Nile. They came up to Egypt. Egypt is the apex of that African culture, of that Nile Valley culture. It's the apex of it.
You know, Alpha and Omega. You know, it's funny, right? Because I'm gonna go back to something she said real quick about you can't steal ideas. Yeah, you can't steal ideas, says the thief. You know, you when you think about um when you think about the corruption and the manipulation and the revisionist history that takes place. I mean, you don't even have to go back as far as her. You can go back and look at um the Daughters of the Confederacy, right? The United Daughters of the Confederacy, and look at what they're doing in the textbooks, in which they're changing the language to from slavery existed to now non-voluntary or involuntary immigrants, right? In terms of listing, our ancestors in this country. This is a practice that's common with white scholarship. And see, because they're often not her, but usually they're skilled in the art and the science of debate. They typically can win those arguments with people who just have the information and the facts, but don't know how to organize them in a way that would be convincing in toe-to-toe combat, and also convincing and able to engage somebody who's going to offer deflection and redirection of the conversation, often moving the goalposts. This is what European scholars do, especially European scholars who are dead set on proving white supremacy and maintaining it. What this is coming from with this particular woman is the fact that she couldn't take an L. And because she couldn't take that L, she's been trying to get her lick back ever since. And so this was supposed to be her shining moment. And then, you know what's funny? Because you think about this, like, they say before the pride comes before the fall, and they speak about it in biblical terms. This is like speaking to somebody who tried to build, I forget the name of the tower, right? That tower that they were trying to build for heaven.
Babel.
Tower of Babel. Tower of Babel, right? And now she's babbling at her highest moment. This is supposed to be her breakthrough moment. And she's babbling because she knows deep down in her heart, she's trying to make sense out of something that doesn't make sense. Every when you go back, all of things come from have an origin story. And what she's trying to do is distort the origin story, because this is how you destroy the historical relevance of black people. This is how you do it. You go back and then you snatch something that was prideful from them. You snatch a part of their history that was prideful, and then say this history is incorrect, and actually our people were the ones that did this. You see the same debate going on in hip hop right now, where there's this whole conversation about where did hip hop start, which culture started hip hop, and things of that nature. Yeah. You're starting to see a whole lot of that now. So this is not anything new in regards to how people, it happens when people think that you're weak. And when they think you're weak, they come and snatch, they just walk up in your house and start taking shit.
Yeah.
And that's what this is about right here. Because had she known what she was talking about, she wouldn't have been calling it Afrocentrism, followed by Eurocentrism, because those of us in the culture call it African-centered. And that way, the language is a lot clearer, and it presents a better ideology in terms of what we mean when we say African-centered. Everything is through the eye of the African. How does this thing affect the African? And then we utilize the African as the model. When we hear people talk like her, it's because they haven't studied. They put their scholarship in places that are disingenuous and of bad faith.
Yeah. The Egyptian influence on Greeks. So Well, let's look at it from the other way around. Once again, so if Greece came about, let's say between 700 and 480 BC, they say that's around the beginning of Greece. And by that time, like I said, Egypt was on its third intermediate period between the 18th and 21st dynasty. Like, a lot of time has passed. A lot of times, and from a lot of the anthropological and archaeological evidence that we have, going back from the first dynasty, there were concepts and philosophies, but we know there were concepts and philosophies from ancient Nubia Tasseti that existed with the philosophies that eventually traveled up to Egypt. So this information existed before Egypt. Even when you're talking about the information of the mystery school, from all the studying and all the information that I've come across, even the information from the mystery school existed before Egypt, because a lot of the myths is that Horus sat on the throne, Horus or Asar, they ruled Egypt before Menes. So that was before Menes. That's what they were saying, that happened before Menes. And they seen themselves as the embodiment of either, whatever god that is, so like Ptah, Amen-Ra, or Asar, saw themselves as the earthly embodiment of God. But once again, these philosophies existed before Egypt. And Egypt was around the 18th to 21st dynasty before Greece came about. Where before Plato and Socrates went into Egypt, did they have this information? No, we know they didn't. They spent around 20 something years in Egypt, then came back. And when they came back to Greece, they were persecuted because the people didn't understand the information. They thought they was coming with some bullshit. It took time for the information to catch on. Like, there's historical information to lay all this out. Pat, my bad. You was gonna say something. My bad. I was on.
Oh, sorry. No, you good. I'm sick, y'all. So anyway, and that's spoken of. Like, we know that in ancient Greece, unpopular ideas were met with murder, death. Like, you got 187.
Yeah.
And a lot of those people that came back from Egypt did, in fact, get hunted down and killed. A lot of them. So I think she still doesn't even understand why she took the L, though. Because you're... I'm sorry. You're using a lot. Jesus. See that? It's the government. As soon as I get cooking. You're standing on your academia and the books you've read and all this other stuff. And the venue was horrible. You shouldn't even took that debate in that location. You knew you weren't going to win. But in any case, yeah. So Dr. Clark just common sensed you to death, lady.
Yeah.
That's all okay. You said it wasn't this. Well, if it happened during this period, these were the only two people around. So if it wasn't them, then it had to be them. That's how you lost. You still ain't figured that, so I'm doing you a favor. Because, and I don't want people, because Mary Lefkowitz ain't a stupid woman. And I don't, she's not a stupid woman. But you don't understand what you don't understand because you ain't studied what you're talking about. And even to the need for Afrocentrism, like the fact that you couldn't answer that, the need for an African-centered worldview, when we have been, the dude that spanked you said that the only reason he got involved in Black history is because he was told he had no history.
Right.
You're not even thinking.
That's the need.
If you were thinking about it on that level, you would understand why. In order for you to come into this space and do what you want to do, you need to be able to provide an alternative. You need to, because people are looking for themselves in places where they were told they don't exist, where they were told they never were, and where they're told there's no proof of them. And now they're looking out at the world, and like PC mentioned, they're seeing videos of statues being torn down, being broken, noses and stuff being disfigured on monuments. They're seeing books being burned. They're seeing history that we were all alive for being retold and rewritten currently on little stuff too. Little stuff like somebody saying Eddie Murphy Delirious wasn't really that funny. I was alive for that. I saw it. It was funny. You know what I'm saying? But we like so much is being rewritten. There's a need, but because you and all of this just shows that you haven't studied in your community. And she looked uncomfortable, probably because she realized the dude she was talking to was not somebody she wanted to be talking to in that moment. But the people that hold up this version of history that you have become a champion for, those people use those narratives to continue to beat black people and keep them subjugated, to continue to tell black people that they have no value. And we know you said out of your own mouth, which is why the dude that was interviewing you very cleverly kept moving around the fact that you said that there was, in fact, some influence there. Like, but like PC, I agree with PC, and he said it twice now. He need to say it a couple more times. This is basically a sore loser, mad because the person that beat her ass up and died before she could do anything about it. So now you're doing interviews with dudes that look like they in a prison cell, right in the next KKK manifesto. No disrespect to dude, he might be cool peoples, I don't know, but that's what you look like in the clip, bro.
Getting roasted.
And this is where you are now, where you should be, because let's also remember, it wasn't just like she has a vendetta against a lot of these African-centered scholars because she used to show up to their lectures and heckle them from the crowd.
Yeah.
Dr. Ben famously waved her off with a finger, with a hand wave while she was heckling him at one of his lectures. He waved her off. Yeah, that's disputed. Anyways, next question. I'm sure that didn't feel good to the grandmother of Karen's. I don't know, man. And I'm not gonna keep holding back this cough, so I'm going on mute.
Yeah, but real quick, it is important for us to prove that Egypt was an African civilization for, like you said, the simple fact that that black people for so long have been taught that we had no contribution to the world, no contribution to civilization, no contribution to mankind. And then we come to find out that mankind owes us the debt because we are the contribution. The African ancestors are the contribution to mankind, and everything else came out of the concepts that came out of Africa. That doesn't diminish anybody else's furthering of the concepts and furthering of the information, but it started somewhere and it came from somewhere, right? And so because I'm thinking about civilizations that were in existence at that time that could have been in existence, and that's only ancient Egypt, Greece, and maybe Mesopotamia. But they're not saying that they got this information from Mesopotamia. They ain't saying that. They ain't claiming that at all. They ain't saying they went that far. All right. So that just, like you said, Pat, that leaves two civilizations, ancient Greece and ancient Egypt. Ancient Greece, well, this information existed before you. Case closed. That's common sense.
Yo, and I'm glad y'all brought it up because I didn't even know about the heckling.
I didn't know that either.
That's some bullshit. Oh, first of all, man, Pat, I'm gonna have to give it up to you, bro. You just you cooking on the open fire, like somebody just got roasted on the pit. You know what I mean? So I gotta, give you your flowers, bro. Sick and all, pulled up and got off the bench and pulled the Willis Reed. You know what I mean? Let your team to the chip, man. Bro, that was roasted. And but I think it speaks to the character of that. First of all, we speak to the anti-black male misandry that's exhibited here by this woman. to be following these black and African scholars all around, heckling them, taking L's in these debates, and then to cowardly create a book when they're both deceased. That's when, and I'm not going to say this, they're both, because I'm pretty sure she probably showed up at Ivor Van Sertima. She probably showed up, all these other black intellectuals and scholars and historians, and couldn't take the L, which speaks to that nature. But and this probably be my part in shot for real. I know Pat's not feeling well. There's in the Vatican, right, which was the continuation of the Greek culture, the Romans. You have a vault underground, 7 miles of Greek treasure, Greek history, and anything you wanted to know about the Greek. Egyptian history, Egyptian treasure, and anything else you might have wanted to know. The books, all of the tablets are located in that vault under the Vatican in Rome. There's a whole school designed around Egyptology. It's a literal subject. One of the only subjects to be race based. Anywhere in the world. You have, I wrote it down, hold on. To this day, you have monuments in Egypt that are still standing, that you still cannot replicate. However, in those places, the art is the actual history of those people, our people. This whole notion, and this is why I always fight it when I hear somebody talking about sub-Saharan Africa, because what it is when you call Africa sub-Saharan, and anything north of that, that's white people rewriting themselves into the origins of civilization in the Nile Valley culture, the Nile Valley civilization. That's white people write themselves into the place they can't even currently exist today. There have been numerous risk takers who have gone and stayed in Egypt and used olive oil as some sort of skin what is it called, sunscreen, and then they had also developed all forms of malignant cancer because their skin could not tolerate being in that much sunlight for that much time. Today, these light-skinned Africans who came from the Arabic world, they themselves do not dress the same as the Africans that are depicted on those monuments. Those dark-skinned Africans weren't covered head to toe with robes. They weren't covered all over. All right, they wore the bare minimum when it came to clothes. Their entire body was exposed. All right. Shit, people still talk about how black people in Africa were naked when the people would show up off those shores or people would visit. They would talk about so you don't see that now because the ancient cultures could tolerate it because they had the melanin to actually tolerate that sunlight. And I'm speaking to this because when Patrick brought up a good point about the shot off noses and the rewriting of history. When we see all of these things taking place, this is just another example of this institution, those who practice and propagate the institution of white supremacy, try to utilize their notion of eminent domain. And they believe they even have eminent domain when it comes to our history. So that's why it's important, because our children are watching this, and our children are looking at this ancient battle of who had the greatest dynasty, or who learned from who were the teachers and who were the students. And because we came from a benevolent people, those malicious folk that came and conquered our lands get to tell the story. As speaking of somebody shooting off noses now, as Napoleon Bonaparte once said, I am not worried about history because I will sorry about that. I am not worried about history because I will be the one writing the history.
You can do that when you conquer. You could do that when you've conquered the people, you can write the history. And that's what has happened. African people have been conquered. Egypt has been conquered. So those who conquered Egypt are trying to rewrite the story, or they've rewritten the story, especially the Greeks. So now, quick thing. She talked about the Egyptian mystery school being a farce, and the idea of the mystery school coming from this French book. Baby, they on the pyramids.
They're in a temple.
I'm just saying. It's inscribed in stone on the walls. You know what I'm saying? So that shatters that. But once again, you know, I'll keep saying it like this because I want people to grasp it. The beginning of Greece was between the 18th and 21st dynasties of Egypt. After the third intermediate period, Egypt had failed 3 times by the time Greece came around. But remember, they already had the concepts. The concepts of the mysteries of Asar, Aset, and Ptah, and all these things. Because think about it, if they believe that Heru ruled Egypt before Menes, who was the first pharaoh of the first dynasty, if they believe that Heru ruled before then, Heru come from the mysteries of Asar and Aset. I mean, it's right there. It's right there. So if that's what you believe in, you believe that you are the embodiment of Heru. You believe you're the embodiment of Asar as the pharaoh. And you believe that way before any Greek walked the earth.
Joe.
I'm just saying.
And I'm laughing because I saw what's the comedian, the brother that does all the voices,
Which Godfrey,
right? Because Godfrey was just doing an interview talking about the Asar and Set being sort of like the phenotype, the Superman story.
Right. Heru, yeah.
So if people like this chick right here have their way, the freaking X-Men will be the faces of the civil rights movement.
Hey, man, look.
Magneto and Professor X, they were around before Dr. King and Malcolm X. And so Malcolm got his philosophy from Magneto, and Martin, you know, he studied Professor X, and you know, it's just this bullshit.
Man, look, Heru, the story of Heru is the first hero's journey. Every other hero's journey story that you have ever seen comes from the story about Heru avenging his father's death. Superman, Hercules, Christ, Hancock, whoever, all of these heroes, all of these superheroes, and all these characters are molded after him. The hero's journey story is told over Simba, the Lion King. That's it. So all this stuff is African in nature. And like you said, Mary Lefkowitz can't take her L, and she's hell-bent on trying to prove that Egypt didn't influence Greek philosophy, but she can't seem to put together complete thoughts, and she seemed to have half-assed her research. Like Pat said, not saying she's stupid, but her presentation of this is not great at all, and her argument is all over the place.
Well, she's a student of the modern philosophy. And this is where there's going to be fundamental disagreements with how we view things. See, Black people, we have to interpret history from what is and isn't written, because the history was written to exclude us. So if you look at a lot of what the African scholars did, they read the same books you did, but they paid attention to the little details that y'all ignore. And then they put things together. So it very much is a puzzle piece, because nobody wrote directly on it, and those that did were either outcast, discredited, or had their works destroyed. So again, it's a failure to understand what's going on. Especially when you look at it, you can say shit like, I haven't seen where it was written, any of this, because the entirety of what's been written has been written with people that look like you and mine, from the framework of American society. Maybe not a global framework. We all know we can have that argument. I'm not trying to engage in that right now. Yes, we all agree. The three of us here agree. But I'm not trying to have that argument right now. But from an American framework perspective, which is where a lot of this African-centered stuff started, it was designed to make white people look a certain type of way. And America is a direct offshoot of ancient Greek civilizations. So there's that connection too. This is one of the reasons why we learn about Greek society in America, because it is largely seen as the originator of the American ideal. Yeah, like American history, according to a lot of the American established narratives, starts with ancient Greece. So, you know, you have to ask these questions, like, and to her, I would just say, look, if history wasn't written to account for our presence, why would we believe what's written and what you say about it?
I'm just saying, one of the best ways to control the people and keep them oppressed is to convince them that they didn't contribute to any type of civilization. You all are not smart enough to contribute. We had to contribute for it. We had to contribute to this civilization we created, and as a matter of fact, we had to come save you out of your destitute situations. So yeah, ideals of white supremacy right there. Mary Lefkowitz is suspected white supremacist. There we go. So hey, Breakdown Friday. This is how we do it. We're gonna continue rolling how we rolling. We passed 50,000. Thank you once again, everybody, for that. The goal is 100,000. Hell, it's what's today, the 30th? Damn it, we got 30 days. Let's get 50,000 more views, more subscribers in 30 days. So let's get the 100,000 by January. Let's do it. Let's do it. On the Shoulders of Giants, Professor Carlton Jones. Remember, FetLifeStation.com, 7 p.m. Pat, feel better, my brother. We appreciate you pulling up with the flu game. That's why you had to put your superhero suit on so you can make it through. But we appreciate it. And y'all know how we do it. All the ways to support me are in the description. Make sure you like, comment, share, subscribe, everything that you need to do to support this channel. If you want to support me on Patreon, patreon.com/OTSOG. All the information is in the description. Love y'all. Catch you next week.